Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kim Sage. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to part 2 of understanding the 3 types of relational disturbances we can experience. This series will begin by exploring the initial one I mentioned in yesterday's video, which is really about our attachment styles and how those play out and how we had to respond in childhood. It's before we even had language, right? We just began to develop this internalized model or map of like, well, this is, I guess, how relationships work. And so that will be the focus of this series initially. But the second type of relational disturbance that I think is really interesting, and we will come back to this hopefully much later in this series, is what Dan Brown and David Elliott call the core conflictual relationship themes in their textbook. And so basically what they're saying is that we have this development of the experience in our body and we're sort of nonverbal, then we develop narrative memory to begin to make sense of what's happening to us and a way to process and understand over time our experiences. And all of this contributes to a new form of understanding relationships. It's kind of like another layer on top of our attachment styles. And so the CCRT, the core conflictual relationship theme, is a relatively fixed and repeating pattern of a person's relational expectations and experiences based on the person's account of relationships, both past and present. So it kind of like joins with, okay, we have this like internal map that we develop, just as an infant even. And then we develop this memory and understanding and language to make sense of things or not make sense of things, but we have to find a way basically to do that. And that becomes this sort of like expectation about, oh, this is what I should expect in relationships and things like that. And so it is a more complex and diverse type of relational disturbance than the 4 types of attachment. And Dan Brown and David Elliott say this is kind of highly stable by age 5. So we have this other layer of like, okay, this is what relationships look like. Now, you can also have a secure attachment style, but then have a relational disturbance in these CCRTs. In other words, the security was basically there, but then let's say other responses or other experiences began to shape what you perceive as relationship dynamics. And so that is really the core of the CCRT. And then we have the 3rd type of relational disturbance, which is a trauma bond. What is a trauma bond? At the core, a trauma bond is about a differential dynamic of power, and oftentimes a differential dynamic of safety and fear, right? It's that this person that was supposed to keep us safe is often also the source of fear. That really is the heart of it. And so we can see intermittent, right? We can see what that really means is like, I've discussed it oftentimes with borderline parents, that you love me so much and then you're so hurtful and wounding. And so I'm afraid of you, but I also need you. Or you can also be really caring and loving, which is really hard for kids to internalize, which is why I care so much about educating around borderline, not to shame or blame, but to help those who struggle, to help those at the core who were raised by parents like this, to make sense of why this is so difficult for them to deal with in their relationships and these complicated parenting dynamics. So a trauma bond can occur in childhood, but it can also occur in adolescence or adulthood. And so that type of relational disturbance is different from the CCRTs and the initial attachment wound that we can have or disturbance in our when we're first born. And so it can often be a reenactment of an early traumatic environment or experience, but even secure adults who had a secure attachment are vulnerable to trauma bonds, which could be enacted under really, very unstable extreme conditions. What that means is that you could have a secure attachment and then have a very traumatic, chaotic relationship, something that created this trauma bond where you were, alternatively loved and unsafe or cared for and scared, and that can then become its own trauma bond later. But at the core, regardless of where it comes from, if we're talking about, well, what does a trauma bond look like in an attachment pattern, it tends to look like a more disorganized or anxious attachment pattern. So we often see trauma bonds, I do believe, in childhoods raised by parents who were, as I've said, on some level, and it doesn't just have to be borderline, of course, that, you know, at the core, it's that lack of stability or lack of predictability that would swing in wide variation, and oftentimes put a child in the dilemma of the person I most need is also the person I most need to protect myself from. We are going to continue to talk about how to heal those initial attachment disturbances, the relational ones that occur when we are just basically arriving in an environment we have no control over in terms of our caregivers. And so in the next few videos, I'm going to kind of circle back to just going through attachment, going deeper into each style, and then trying to unpack and make sense of these disturbances and these relational dynamics and how to begin to heal. So at the end of this video, please feel free to just think about if any of the last 3 topics I've talked about in terms of attachment or, you know, just relational themes you may have internalized as a child or adult or adolescent or child trauma bonds, you know, kind of what would those look like? What are those? And maybe grab a journal or notebook, and this process would probably be a good idea. Should have mentioned that as we are going through this series. So if you are new here, like I said, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell, and that way you'll be notified when I post new videos. Please feel free to share if you feel safe, and just know that you're not alone. You really are not. And I hope we can take this journey together. So thanks for watching, guys. Please stay safe and well, and I will see you tomorrow. Cheers.